The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM. RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk that hinges on integrated visibility, automated insights, and coordinated actions. RSA solutions are designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. RSA protects millions of users around the world and helps more than 90% of the Fortune 500 companies thrive and continuously adapt to transformational change. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security.
Welcome back to episode 22 of Security and Compliance Weekly. In our second segment, we are joined by an actual RSA customer and practitioner, and we're going to find out if any of what we've been talking about makes sense in the real world. Before we jump back into our discussion, though, I have a couple more non-announcements. Secure World Boston was scheduled for March 25th and 26th at the Haynes Convention Center. This event has been, drumroll please, postponed until further notice. We will keep you in the loop as soon as we know more. And finally, in a little bit of good news, InfoSec World 2020, which was originally scheduled for March 30th through April 1st at the Disney Contemporary Resort, has been rescheduled. Hopefully this is not too overly optimistic, but the new date is June 22nd through 24th. And Security Weekly listeners will continue to have the opportunity to save 15% off the InfoSec World Main Conference or World Pass. To get the discount, visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2020. Click the registration button to register with our discount code, or if you want to have a micro interview, just click on the scheduling button to set up that. All right, let's get back to the discussion. We've been talking about the changing landscape in terms of risk versus security versus compliance, with a little bit of privacy sprinkled in. And as promised for this second segment, we are joined by an actual practitioner. So I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Kevin Haynes. Kevin is the Chief Privacy Officer for the Nemours Foundation. Kevin is responsible for managing regulatory compliance at the federal, state, and industry level, as well as coordinating operations across the health system. Also integrating business operations and technology, developing information protection strategies, and implementing practical and pragmatic procedures for effective information management. Whew, did it all in one breath. Kevin, welcome. And is it okay if I just call you MacGyver?
Sure, absolutely. One of my favorite shows.
Just to start off, Kevin, welcome and thanks for your willingness to join us. Just take a minute or two to tell us about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, thanks. So I appreciate the long-winded, announcement of what I do and my responsibilities are. But essentially, I am, my team is responsible for managing information and protecting it, whether it be our patients, families, our internal associates, third parties that share information with us, and also us sharing with others, third parties. I'm part of the compliance team, so general compliance also. I report to our chief compliance officer, and we have very tight relationships with information systems, operations, security, et cetera. So we're very tightly bound and close-knit group that work together to ensure we're complying with all our laws and regulations.
Kevin,
Great.
I've got a totally self-serving question to ask. Where are you located?
I'm in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. This is where our corporate headquarters is. We are a pediatric healthcare system, so we operate in Florida, Georgia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, our two primary hospitals in Orlando and in Wilmington, Delaware.
Yeah, I'm in Delaware. I see Nemours all the time, so I'm very familiar with it. So I was wondering if you were local to me, and I'm like, let's grab coffee. So, but Jacksonville's a bit
next
far.
time I'm up there, I will. So
sounds good.
Yeah.
Now, Nemours has a great reputation here. They're They're one of the best. It's weird. In this area, we have some fantastic children's hospitals. In Philadelphia, of course, there's CHOP, and in Delaware, Nemours is just they're tops. Not even funny.
Yeah,
they're amazing.
Can't get in a better place with two great institutions working together to help kids.
So I have a question. Yeah, I have a question. So thank you for joining us, by the way. What is your stance on compliance against a pandemic, right? We've got this coronavirus stuff going on. How are you modifying compliance regimes within your company to account for work from home, to account for what to do during disaster? Like, are you focusing on BCP-DR COOP, or are you focusing on more of the institutionalized response?
Directly the institutionalized response to the COVID-19 event that's taking place now. So all of our efforts right now are geared towards preparing and prepping for, potential inflow or influx of patients that come to our facilities. So when it comes to compliance, we are monitoring very closely all the communications out of both the federal and state levels to ensure that we are communicating with the operations, clinical and business operations, what can and cannot be done. So there are very specific rules that are in place that are taking some time for the agencies to get out there to let us know what they are waiving and what they're not going to impose on us. And then there are others where our commercial payers, the government can operate one way, but we still have commercial entities that have requirements of us as well. So it's a very difficult process, lots of information coming at us from all kinds of areas that we're trying to keep a handle on. And so our incident command teams and structures are built to take all that input and then provide some useful, relevant, timely guidance to our associates.
I think to ask a little bit more nuanced variation of the same question, I guess from the top down, from your whatever your governance is, your C-suite, executive committee, whatever it is, how is the attitude of the organization changed, if any, in terms of meeting the demands of this unprecedented pandemic that we're responding to, and still trying to find some sort of balance with the things we've been talking about in terms of security, compliance, risk, and even privacy.
Yeah, so we're lucky in this regard that we are part of a compliance department, amongst others, are part of the incident command structure. So when there are new rules or some information come out or questions being asked by our internally, we're able to present those answers in a way that are both, expedient and helpful to our frontline staff, but also maintain that the compliance requirements, which are still in place. So some items can be waived, or they're changing the regulatory rules at a state level to allow certain licensing to take place for telehealth visits, as an example. But we approach it not independently, but collaboratively. And I think that's an important aspect of in general, at Nemours, our compliance efforts. We try not to do things in a silo. We want to collaborate and communicate with any department that could be impacted or affected by whatever guidance we provide, whether it be part of a pandemic or outside the pandemic.
Okay.
Kevin,
I hope that answered your question.
Jeff,
go ahead, Matt.
That's great. I was going to ask, you said you report into the compliance group. Does the compliance team also own risk? How are you managing kind of the higher level risk across the different teams? How are you, because you have an interesting title in privacy officer, right? And then you report into compliance. Where does risk sit in the organization? Is it part of the compliance team? Does it sit outside of that? How does that collaboration happen when you think about the risk drivers driving both the compliance and the privacy office?
Yes. So it does exist everywhere. So we don't have a centralized enterprise risk management department that collects and aggregates all risk for the enterprise in one spot. Our team, the compliance team, uses, you mentioned RSA Archer, to aggregate risks that have identified through audits, through privacy assessments, security assessments, through our compliance department's assessments. And that's where we begin our collection and dissemination of the risk profiles. And like many organizations, we have a risk governance or a governance structure around compliance. And speaking of compliance, we're talking general compliance, whether it be laws, regulations, our internal practices and policies that we have. We want to ensure that we're getting the information out to the people that need it. So we have committees, compliance committees, executive security and privacy committees that get together and talk about the issues and concerns that we're seeing. And this being one of those items with the COVID-19 response, where information and having that structure is extremely important to understand and analyze and provide, I guess, the best guidance possible under the circumstances.
Right. So you're leveraging the platform to collaborate risks across the different teams, since there isn't a centralized risk management kind of umbrella in your particular case. So that's
do as much as we can. Yeah, we do as much as we can to share what we have. So we recognize that silos present obviously challenges for resolving problems or solving, finding solutions to risk or the mitigation efforts, remediation efforts. How are we going to treat it? And so by opening it up and being open and transparent, it's providing us the platform to have those conversations and make decisions that are informed and I guess justified.
So you're referring to these different groups as silos. Do you feel like where you are within the organization, within the compliance group, are you a peer silo, or do you feel like you have a little bit more or less influence over the other silos the way you're describing them?
Yeah, I guess maybe silos it denotes a feeling of separation. So we understand that we can't know all the risks that exist for all areas. So we trust our other departments, whether it be it could be an accreditation for our cardiac unit or for our I guess cystic fibrosis teams. We understand they do know their requirements more than we will. So we work together in those individual departments to bring together an overall risk profile and risk structure that we understand better, but understand that we don't have that information available to us. So we do use our platform, the Compliance RSA Archer, to provide us the means to collect and identify and see what's out there and get a better view of what our partners, not peers, not in separate units, but what our partners are seeing on a daily, weekly, whatever basis.
Okay, so the question that I have for you is, how are you utilizing technology to bridge the gap between silos? And more specifically, what is the methodology behind putting technologies in place to bridge that?
Yeah, so we have automation efforts. So we want to make sure that information that we understand is coming through from multiple sources is being delivered to the right people in the organization. As an example, so we may have a new third party coming on board to assist with a new surgical unit. And that third party would have specific requirements that the organization, Nemours, that we would need to impose on them, and also understand from a security and privacy perspective how they are going to safeguard and protect our patients and families. So we would use our technology to identify the risks from our register that may apply, catalog and implement assign the controls that are needed for that particular engagement, that implementation, and then use that to communicate with our business partners so they better understand what the requirements are from a purely specific, now in this case, a privacy perspective. What is the privacy office requiring of this particular vendor to implement to ensure that the information is safeguarded? That's what we use the platform for, the technology.
Are you the only silo that uses this particular platform, or do they have some level of access to it as well?
No, yeah. So our organization has access to the platform. We definitely we have we have security, privacy, compliance, human resources, our billing and coding departments as working within the Archer platform to aggregate the information. And we can share that information freely as we see fit with those other departments. But our organization, we have licensing for everybody to gain access to the platform. So we'll use it to send automatic notifications, announcements, things that are relevant and pertinent to their operations, using the platform as the basis and the foundation for that information being sent.
So let's take that automation and let's take the other hot topic of the day, which is, of course, the pandemic. And have you been finding use, more and more use? Has your use increased of this automation due to the recent events? I mean,
no, it hasn't. Yeah. So, well, I was just thinking about this the other day, trying to find ways, how can we take advantage of the platform we have to get information out there? And so in this case, the information is so fast coming our way that we're having a hard time understanding exactly what, not exactly, but what is forthcoming. So information we had yesterday may be irrelevant today based upon information that we already have. What we are using, what I recognized and was thankful for, is that I have a place to keep track of all of the inputs that are coming our way, all the questions and concerns. So, IS departments and information technology teams, desktops, et cetera, have a service desk application, help desk, and they use a ticketing system. Traditionally, groups like us, compliance, privacy, legal, et cetera, don't have the same capabilities, same ways of tracking tickets in the same manner. We've built our platform and customized it, Archer, in a way that it acts like a ticket system. So we can take the 100+ questions, concerns we get every single month, assign them and apply them, insert them into the Archer environment, and we have a way of tracking it. Then when the similar questions exist or similar guidance is needed, we just do a search, find it, and we can oftentimes copy and paste that same exact guidance we give into one department to another. We also will take as we do our monthly, quarterly reporting, we'll look at the topics that we're getting from our constituents, from our customers internally, and be able to identify those areas that we need to focus on. So just this morning, I was working on a communication related to the use of technology devices, personal devices, for providing care or talking to each other in the organization. So I was able to find out through our system where we've seen common questions occur and where I would need to direct that communication.
Yeah, nice. Now,
recently,
I'll go in.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I wanted to go back to the automation and the closed loop aspects of this, right? So if you think about driving your control frameworks out, using it as a baseline across the different departments, are you also collecting data then to bring back in from a reporting metrics perspective to kind of track overall progress against where you are across those various control directives?
It's a manual effort right now. So we are, it's not automated. So when we do send out an assessment of a particular technology or an engagement with a third party that may just be a service, as we've driven the controls that are required, we've identified gaps during our assessment. And those gaps need to be filled. So we will reach back out and specify periods of time to ensure that those gaps are mitigated or they've been reduced to an acceptable level. We have not automated that feedback mechanism, closing the loop. It's there. We're capable of doing it. We just have not implemented that portion of our risk management program yet.
I was just curious because that's where a lot of organizations struggle, right? If you think about it, they've laid out this great compliance this control framework, and then as they're out deploying it and implementing it, how do you track status across where you are? How close are you to getting to kind of, 100% deployment or whatever those key metrics are going to be? That's why I ask, because a lot of organizations struggle with that.
Very true, and we do as well. So it's a matter of, this year, I guess actually this first half of this year, we had a strategic project built specifically on that aspect for privacy-related controls. So the intent was to, as we already deliver the risks, we already deliver our findings when we do our assessments, areas that need to be filled in, but then we want to make sure that we don't want to have to do the work to identify whether or not the control was fixed. So Archer does have, under the latest versions, the ability for email answers from third parties as well as internally about whether or not certain findings or gaps we've identified have been resolved. And that is in the works. We want to have that because we recognize that is vitally important to overall risk management and closing those loops, those dangling chads for all the Florida listeners.
So I'm finding it really hard. I'm sorry, Scott, did you have a question?
I did. My question is, how are you interfacing with public relations and lawyers to make sure that they're up to speed with all of this changing data, right? And all of the requirements that are coming in on a daily basis? Like, what is your strategy for that?
So we are integrated inside we have a subgroup, a working group that is getting together daily now to discuss any changes. And so as we provide guidance, just this morning I delivered 2 additional guidance pieces, which I worked with our legal services team, our legal department, to ensure that when needed, they have the accurate information required to remain compliant under the new, some new privacy rules that have been relaxed. And also in areas that we've identified that we're getting questions by. So by cataloging the requests and questions in Archer, when we look at the topics, we can identify those that we should be focusing on. So we're getting even, as another example I used earlier, the use of personal phones and personal devices. So as we got more questions in, we started realizing that it's time to develop some guidance so that our incident command teams can give the right advice on how to use certain technology to do their jobs, working remotely like we all are right now. Well, I'm in the office, but so we are working in that manner where we get the inputs, we get them in, we see the types of topics that people are giving us, then we can develop guidance, work with our legal teams to ensure that it's accurate and correct, and we send it out for dissemination through the incident command structure. And that's similar to what we would do in any case, whether in this or not. So if it's not a pandemic incident command structure, we would still have the same workflow, identifying the issues, working with the appropriate stakeholders, and delivering information from the privacy office that gives clear, timely guidance.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Jeff, do you have anything?
I think Jeff just got dropped on Skype, so he's going to come back in for a second. That's why his window was frozen. So yeah.
Then Matt, I think you're hosting.
I guess I'm hosting now. I guess I'm up. So Kevin, I think the way you're leveraging the Archer platform is interesting, right? And the way you're collecting data, using it to correlate across and then disseminate out what you need, right? Where a lot of organizations, because they have these different groups and different structures, they may not, they may not have all the same information because they're kind of siloed out. And I think this is the premise of integrated risk management, right? At the end of the day, is the ability to integrate all these different components together, leveraging a platform like Archer that really allows you to facilitate those activities. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about what you guys have built with the platform.
If I can jump in.
Yeah, David.
Kevin, I was just wondering I think Matt, great comments, and Kevin, you too so far. It'd be interesting to hear from you, Kevin, in terms of how do you measure success of your program as you report back to your management chain and the business in terms of what your objectives are and how you measure that? I think I would always ask that of customers myself is metrics and how can I measure success of a function like compliance and privacy?
So the platform is our basis for metrics and measurement, right? So we're counting on having the data and the information necessary to make those calls. What are the metrics we're looking for? How do they compare with our industries and what are out there? I have a quarterly call with other privacy officers, specifically children's healthcare organizations, hospitals. And I frequently tell them, talk to them about how valuable, not just Archer, but any GRC tool is to an organization and to our success, because it does give us that visibility into what's out there, so we can look at measure our success. How are we doing? And so we pick and choose, like anybody else. What are our metrics? What are we looking to? What are we looking towards to ensure that we are meeting the demands that are by our regulators, by our agencies, internally, et cetera? So by tracking a privacy request that comes in, looking at it from whether it's a potential privacy violation, and what this kind of maybe too far into the weeds, but we identify two things. We have privacy violations that are rights of an individual. The Office for Civil Rights is our primary regulatory body, and they do consider privacy a civil right. Therefore, how are we maintaining those rights? This is amendments, access to the information, changes, things of that nature. Then we look at, well, how are we as an organization handling potential violations of their actual data, the breaches that occur? And so we monitor and use the platform to track not just our potential privacy violations that are reported to us by anyone really, but we also go through the investigation and incident handling process as well, using Archer. So we can keep track of not just what we got that might be, but also what are the actual incidents that occur. And we do apply the standard risk models, threats, vulnerabilities, impact, for scoring for our risk. So we also use the risk register portion of Archer to assign specific risks to incidents that occur and also to questions that we get. So we align our risks with what's happening operationally every day. And that allows us as a chief privacy officer to really make good decisions about what comes next. What are we looking at for going forward? So measuring success, that specific question, how do we look at it? Well, we want to make sure that our program, which is based upon whatever frameworks that are out there, both the OIG 7 elements of a effective compliance program, we use for privacy the AICPA's generally accepted privacy principles, not to be confused with the generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP. Okay. And we use that as our framework to measure how are we with collection, use, our management, administration, and all the elements that come along with the framework. We have those embedded also into our platform, so we can show that in the monitoring area of an effective program, we are reviewing potential privacy violations on patient charts, and we are holding people accountable when we find that they potentially have accessed information inappropriately.
Okay,
right.
So let me dig into that just a little bit deeper here. We have a bunch of listeners, viewers that don't see us on YouTube, but they're on the podcast, right? So for everybody who's not able to watch, right? What would be one, if you could identify, what would be one game-changing metric that you're collecting that as soon as you saw it, you said, that makes complete sense, right? Why weren't we watching this before? For a healthcare org, right? It's very hard sometimes to be able to filter through all of the data and kernelize what's going on into a metric, right? So can you share one really game-changing metric that you were able to pull out?
So so maybe it's over time, but one metric that we realized a few years ago that we needed to get more detailed on is where, and kind of where breaches occur. What's happening, not from a breach occurred, but was it a paper event? Was it a fax? Was it a text message? Did someone misassigned a guarantor to a patient's account, therefore a bill sent to the wrong place? So to answer your question directly, if there was one metric that really changed my perspective on how to best utilize and what information should be in the platform, it's that one, being able to identify specifically what caused, the root cause of that breach, not in general terms, but very specific. Mm-hmm. Real life example is that we recognized that during our registration process, this was many years ago, that our primary care provider information wasn't being updated frequently enough. Therefore, we were essentially sending information to the wrong primary care provider. So it could be a patient care and a privacy concern. So we went through a process with our business units as we saw that in our Archer environment through the incident management area. It was a concern. It was an issue that came up frequently for not assigning the right primary care provider. And by getting that, we are also able to build on that to identify wrong guarantor assignment. So these are people responsible for insurance payments. So those two are very important to the success of our privacy program, and being able to communicate with facts, with accurate information to our operations, what was happening and how to fix it. Because we could see it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin, I did have one burning question, and I'm finding it hard to just sort of have this sort of higher level discussion because we're all living in this sort of reactionary, brave new world of the pandemic thing. But, I promised our audience that we would get your feedback as a practitioner on what we were discussing in the first segment. So just, briefly in terms of what we were presenting or what David was presenting in terms of taking more of a risk-based or let's say framework approach to measuring the success of a security program within an organization versus the historical compliance / checkbox approach. Where do you stand on that? Which way do you lean? How do you see one working better than the other, if you could, please?
So make sure I understand correctly. What you're asking is
sure.
Checkbox versus real world, get your hands dirty kind of guidance and feedback. Is that
compliance versus risk in terms of a framework approach versus a checkbox approach is as succinctly as I can put it.
So, in our opinion, it's both. So there's an absolute need for the checkboxes to make sure that you are complying or have programs in place that comply with those elements that are absolutely required in your programs that are out there, whether it be security, privacy, compliance, business management, third-party vetting, whatever it may be. You need the checkboxes. But to be successful, and what we found and what we practice every day is that it's not just about the checkbox, obviously. You also have to be very open. You have to be available. And so our number one priority is being available for our associates, our employees, and others just to ask questions. It could be our patients and families. We want to make sure that we have the outreach efforts, that we're reaching all of the staff that are required. We have directed communications that are focused on, procedures, policies, the reliable methods that are needed for a particular group, not generic compliance statements, but very specific directed awareness and education that is useful and relevant to them. And that's absolutely the most important part, in my opinion, to ensuring that you are compliant, that you're not putting the organization at greater risk of fines, penalties, or government oversight because you aren't getting the information out there. So we need to make sure that your frontline associates are complying with the procedures that are necessary, but you need to also develop in a way that is specific to their job role and job function, because if they're not going to work. They're going to find ways around it. And so being flexible, being pragmatic, being practical in these efforts is vitally important to the success.
Great. Appreciate your candor and your feedback there. What I'm hearing at the end of the day in sort of this risk versus compliance question is that for those that believe they're overly burdened with the checkbox approach, shifting to a risk-based approach is not an easier path. It's not a lesser path, less work, less tedium. What works at the end of the day is more involvement, being proactive. I like the word that you used, and I think it's a great word to sum up how a security program should work in an organization, making yourself available. Appreciate your time today, David, as well. Thank you. Unfortunately, our time is at hand, so we need to wrap this up. Enjoyed the conversation greatly.
Our time is at hand.
Our time is at hand.
Man, you can turn this into a Disney song.
or not, but gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been a great discussion. I appreciated the two parts to it. I think that was very special, and thank you very much. So that's it for today. That's a wrap for Security and Compliance Weekly. Everybody stay safe, stay secure, stay at home, and let's all do our best to get through this challenging time.